What happens when the most feared woman on Bay Street, a CEO who once brought a pension fund manager to tears over a single quarterly report, is ordered by her grandfather to marry a man who patches ceilings in Scarborough for $300 a job? Imogen Ward had spent 16 years turning Ward Capital into the most formidable mid-market investment firm in Canada. At 38, she sat at the top of a 32-story tower on King Street West with an unobstructed view of Lake Ontario and a reputation that preceded her into every room she entered. She wore Loro Piana in January and wore it like armor. She did not ask twice. She did not apologize. And she had not taken a personal day since her mother's funeral in 2019. So when her grandfather summoned her on a Tuesday morning in March with nothing but a two-word text, "My office," she drove to his Rosedale townhouse already bracing for a fight. Cornelius Ward was 83 years old, legally blind in one eye, and still the most calculating man Imogen had ever known. He had built Ward Capital from a two-room brokerage in Hamilton in 1971. He had handed it to Imogen not out of sentimentality, but because she was the only person in the family who understood that capital did not rest, and neither should the people managing it. She found him in his study, the Persian rug thick under her heels, the air smelling of cedar and old paper, and something medicinal she didn't ask about. "There is a man," Cornelius said without preamble, "named Lennox Parrish. He lives in Scarborough. He does renovation work, drywall, mostly. He has a daughter, 7 years old." Imogen waited. 26 years ago, Cornelius continued, his voice measured and unhurried, his father, Robert Parrish, pulled me out of my vehicle on the 400 during a whiteout storm. My car had gone through the guardrail. I was upside down in the dark. Robert Parrish stopped his truck, came down the embankment in blowing snow, and got me out with his bare hands. He refused any payment. He said he was just passing by and that he was glad I was alive. Cornelius paused. Robert died 4 years later. Industrial accident at a construction site in Brampton. Left behind a wife and a boy of 11. Imogen said nothing. The wife passed 2 years ago. The boy, Lennox, has been raising his daughter alone since his partner left when the child was an infant. Cornelius turned his clouded gaze toward her. "I hold a controlling 49% of Ward Capital's voting shares, as you know." Her chest tightened. "Percival Strauss has been acquiring proxies for the remaining 2% held in institutional accounts. If he consolidates those positions, he can force a board vote by June. He will restructure the firm, remove you, and install his own people." Cornelius folded his hands on the desk. "I will transfer my 49% into your name. An irrevocable trust, majority control. Your seat is permanent." "And in exchange," Imogen said quietly, "you will marry Lennox Parrish. You will provide a stable home for him and his daughter. You will honor the debt I owe that family." He met her eyes. "Or I sell my 49% to Percival Strauss by the end of the month." The silence in the room was the kind that settles after a sentence has landed with full weight, and nothing around it will ever be quite the same. Imogen looked at the legal folder on the desk beside his teacup. The papers were already drawn. Of course they were. "He's a drywall contractor," she said, and heard the edge in her own voice. "He is Robert Parrish's son," Cornelius replied, and he said yes. Imogen picked up the folder. She read the first page. She set it back down. "Where does he live?" The address was an apartment complex in North Scarborough, not far from the 401. Imogen's driver pulled up that same evening, and she stepped out onto a parking lot that needed resurfacing, in heels that cost more than a month of rent in this building. The intercom had a broken speaker. She took the stairs. Apartment 4C. She knocked. The door opened, and the man standing in it was not what she had assembled in her mind on the drive over. Lennox Parrish was tall, taller than she expected, with the kind of frame that came from actual physical work rather than a gym membership. His dark hair was pushed back from his face, slightly overgrown. He had green eyes, calm and direct, and he was wearing a gray thermal shirt with a faded logo and paint-spattered jeans. He smelled of sawdust and dish soap. He did not look threatened by her. That was the first thing she noticed. He did not look resentful either. He just looked tired, in the quiet and permanent way of someone who had been managing alone for a very long time. "Ms. Ward," he said, not a question. Before she could respond, a small girl appeared at his elbow. She had dark curly hair in two uneven pigtails, and a gap where her front teeth should have been, and she was clutching a thick sketchbook with a drawing of what appeared to be a horse wearing a knitted sweater. "Is that the fancy lady from the internet?" the girl asked, with a complete absence of tact that is the exclusive province of 7-year-olds. "Darcy," Lennox put a gentle hand on the top of her head, "give me 5 minutes. Go finish the horse." "She needs boots," Darcy said with enormous seriousness and disappeared back inside. Lennox stepped aside to let Imogen in. The apartment was small. A combined living and kitchen area, a narrow hallway, 2 doors off it. The furniture was clearly secondhand. The walls had been recently repaired and repainted. Well, she noted, the seams were invisible, and there was a colored pencil drawing of a lake taped above the kitchen table that had been done by someone who genuinely understood light. "I assume you want to lay out the terms," Lennox said, leaning against the kitchen counter. He wasn't being rude, he was being efficient. She recognized the quality immediately. "Yes." Imogen set her bag on the table without asking. "This is a practical arrangement. You will receive a monthly transfer of $60,000 into an account of your choosing. Darcy will be enrolled at a private school in North York, full tuition, extracurriculars, whatever she needs. You'll both move into my condo in Yorkville. You will be present at public events when required. You will not interfere with my work, my schedule, or my decisions, and you will not speak to the press." She pulled the prenuptial agreement from her bag and set it in front of him. Lennox looked at it. He didn't pick it up immediately. He looked at Darcy's drawing on the wall instead. That lake, that careful blue, and something moved across his face. A shadow. Deep and then gone. "I don't want the money," he said. Imogen blinked. "I beg your pardon." "The 60,000. I don't want it." He met her eyes. "But Darcy needs somewhere safe. Somewhere with a good school and a building with working security and a life that isn't one slow leak away from falling apart." He said it plainly, without self-pity or performance. "I'll sign your contract. But I'm not doing this for the check." Imogen studied him for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. "Fine," she said. "Sign it." He did. The wedding was 2 weeks later. A 20-minute ceremony at a registry office on Yonge Street. Imogen wore a cream blazer. Lennox wore a suit that was slightly too short in the sleeve. The only witness was Cornelius's solicitor. Darcy, who had insisted on attending, wore a purple dress and had drawn her own corsage on a piece of cardstock and pinned it to her collar with a safety pin. That evening, Lennox and Darcy arrived at the Yorkville condo with 4 bags, a box of art supplies, and one extremely battered stuffed moose named Gerald. Imogen showed them the east-facing guest suite, 2 rooms, shared bath, their own entrance from the hallway if they chose. "The kitchen is open," she said. "I have someone who comes in 3 mornings a week. The building has a concierge and a security team on every floor. The code to my home office is not available to you." Lennox nodded. Darcy was already lying flat on the white carpet of the living room, arms spread wide, looking at the ceiling. "Dad," she said, "it's like a cloud in here." "Don't get whatever's on your hands on it," he said. He looked at Imogen. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for the space." "It's a contract," she replied, and turned away before she could examine why the words felt slightly hollow as she said them. For the first 3 weeks they kept to different orbits. Imogen left before 7, returned after 9. Lennox took Darcy to her new school on the subway and was always back by 8:30. He did not touch the money in the account Imogen had set up. Twice, she checked. She began to notice things she hadn't expected to notice. Lennox woke at 5:30 each morning. He made Darcy's breakfast, always something warm, and packed her lunch in a small insulated bag with her name written on the outside in marker and a drawing of the day's weather tucked under the flap. On rainy days, he drew clouds. On clear days, a small sun wearing sunglasses. He sat for long stretches on the condo balcony in the evenings with a worn leather notebook and a phone she'd noticed was not his personal cell. A different phone, matte-cased, entirely unremarkable, that he kept in the inside pocket of his jacket. She told herself it wasn't her business. Then the Percival Strauss situation took an unexpected turn. Ward Capital's anchor client, Tundra Industrial, a resource management company out of Edmonton, had been on the verge of pulling its discretionary mandate and signing with Strauss Capital instead. The loss would have cost Ward Capital nearly $400 million in managed assets. Imogen had been fighting the relationship for 6 weeks. On a Wednesday morning, Tundra's CEO called her directly to say they were staying. More than staying, they were doubling the mandate. Frankly, the CEO told her, we received some information about Strauss's practices that we found concerning, and we had a conversation, not with your team, that reminded us why we trust Ward. Imogen had not initiated any such conversation. Her CEO had no idea what she was talking about either. She came home that evening and found Lennox at the stove, making soup from scratch. He turned down the heat without being asked, the way people do when they've been cooking long enough to feel the room. Tundra Industrial, Imogen said, setting her bag on the counter. They renewed, doubled the mandate. Good news, Lennox said. I didn't make that happen. Lennox glanced over to check on Darcy, who was at the kitchen table with her sketchbook, tongue at the corner of her mouth, drawing something enormous. Maybe they just changed their minds. That's not how institutional clients work, Imogen said. I know, Lennox said mildly. He ladled soup into a bowl and set it on the counter. Eat. You've been up since before 6. She didn't eat, but she stood there a moment longer than she intended to, watching a man in paint-worn jeans stir a pot on her professional-grade range and hum something quietly to himself as though none of it were strange at all. That night, unable to sleep, she called in a favor from a corporate intelligence contact. A former analyst named Vickers, who ran a private firm out of Ottawa and did not scare easily. Vickers called back at 3 in the morning. When Imogen heard the particular stillness in his voice, she sat up. I've hit clean walls, he said. Everything about Lennox Parish from the last decade is documented. Sin, work history, tax records, but it's all been constructed. The incorporation papers for his renovation company trace back to a numbered entity in BC, which is itself nested inside 3 holding companies. When I tried to access the BC registry records, I received a cease notice from a law firm in Vancouver I've never encountered before. He paused. I looked the firm up. They represent a fund called Parish Meridian. Imogen went very still. Parish Meridian was not a name spoken often on Bay Street. It was spoken the way people spoke about weather systems or tectonic plates, forces so large that naming them felt almost beside the point. A sovereign wealth structure, origin unclear, holdings spanning 3 continents, founded by a single anonymous individual who had not been publicly identified in 10 years of operation. Parish Meridian did not take interviews. It did not file PR. It had once quietly acquired enough preferred shares in a Crown Corporation's partner fund to redirect federal infrastructure spending by $2 billion, and no one had connected the dots for 8 months. Get out of the search, Imogen said. Already done, Vickers said. Imogen, who exactly did your grandfather ask you to marry? The Ward Capital annual dinner was held that year at the Royal Ontario Museum, under the great blue whale skeleton in the entrance hall. It was the social event of the spring season. Board members, institutional clients, a curated selection of press, every senior financier in Toronto who had been smart enough to RSVP. Percival Strauss was there, of course. He was 61, broad-shouldered, with the kind of permanent tan that came from not having to think about where you went in February. He spent the first hour working the room with the ease of a man who had already decided the evening belonged to him. Imogen had arranged a new suit for Lennox. He'd accepted it without comment. When he stepped out of his room that evening, Imogen had the disconcerting experience of seeing someone she thought she understood and realizing she didn't. The suit was charcoal, well cut, and On Lennox it read entirely differently than it would have on anyone else in that room. There was no performance to it. He didn't look dressed up. He looked like someone who had made a careful decision to let one layer of the cover story slip for a single evening. She recovered her composure quickly. He noticed that she recovered quickly, and something in his eyes shifted. A brief, quiet acknowledgement before it was gone. "I'll stay out of the way," he said, straightening his cuff. "Don't let Percival Strauss corner you," she replied. He nodded, and that was that. The evening was going well. 3 new client relationships confirmed, 2 board members noticeably warmer than they'd been since the proxy rumors began, until Percival Strauss materialized at Imogen's elbow near the bar, his 2 managing directors flanking him like punctuation. He glanced at Lennox with the particular blankness of a man who had decided not to bother. "Imogen." Strauss's smile had been load-bearing for decades. "You look remarkable as always, a beat calibrated for maximum effect, and this must be the renovation specialist. Cornelius always did have unconventional judgment." Imogen's fingers tightened around her glass. Lennox touched her elbow lightly, just enough. "Percival Strauss," Lennox said, his voice easy and level. "I've heard a fair bit about you." Strauss turned to him with mild condescension. "Have you? The drywall trade follows more news than I'd have thought." "The drywall trade follows what pays," Lennox said pleasantly. He tilted his head, just slightly. "I've actually been curious about something. The Meridian-linked positions in your Q4 filing, the ones routed through the Calgary Feeder Fund, those rolled over in January, didn't they? Must have been a challenging month." Strauss's smile did not disappear all at once. It retreated the way a tide retreats, gradually, and what it revealed underneath was not sand. It was something older and colder. "I don't know what you think you're referring to," Strauss said carefully. "No?" Lennox said. "I can be more specific if that's helpful." He leaned in fractionally. The tone did not change. It did not need to. The OSC typically responds to formal tip submissions within 30 days, give or take. Strauss did not say another word. He set his glass on the nearest tray and removed himself from the conversation, with the particular urgency of a man recalculating every assumption he had made about this evening, and about the last 6 weeks, and about the quiet man in the charcoal suit, who had apparently been standing in his blind spot for longer than he had any idea. Imogen watched him go. Then she turned to the man beside her, the man who had been making soup from scratch in her kitchen 48 hours ago, who packed weather drawings in a 7-year-old's lunch, and felt the floor tilt slightly under her. "Lennox," she said quietly, "we are going to need to talk." He looked at her. For the first time since they'd met, he didn't look tired. He looked like someone who had been waiting, with very great patience, for precisely this conversation. "Yes," he said, "we are." She came home to find Darcy asleep on the sectional with Gerald the moose tucked under her arm and a half-finished drawing of a giraffe in a raincoat face down on the cushion beside her. Lennox covered Darcy with a blanket, then walked to the balcony. Imogen followed. He was quiet for a moment, looking out over the city, the CN Tower lit to the south, the lake invisible but present in the darkness, the low hum of the Gardiner Expressway below. The air was cold and smelled of the water and of the particular spring that Toronto only produces in late April, when winter finally concedes. Then he reached into his jacket and set the second phone on the railing. "My name is Lennox Parrish," he said. "That part is true. My father was Robert Parrish. That is also true." He paused. "When I was 22, I inherited a small amount from my father's estate, about $40,000. I invested it in 3 early-stage tech companies through a network I found on my own. 2 of them failed. 1 of them did not." He said it without drama, the way you state a fact that ceased to surprise you years ago. "By 27, I had a problem. The problem was that the number had grown large enough that if I attached my name to it, I would spend the rest of my life as a target. So I did not attach my name to it." He looked at her. "Parrish Meridian has operated through intermediaries and legal structures for 10 years. No photograph, no byline, no address." Imogen's voice came out steady, which she considered a significant personal achievement. You are Parish Meridian. Yes. She looked at him. You hold positions in firms that sit above Ward Capital's creditors. Among other things. Percival Strauss's Q4 positions. I know what Percival Strauss has done with 3 pension fund managers over the last 2 years, Lennox said quietly. The OSC submission is not a bluff. Imogen pressed her palms flat on the railing. The city spread out below them, indifferent and bright. Why, she said. Why the renovation work? Why Scarborough? Why agree to this? To all of this, when you could have? Because 4 years ago, Lennox said, and his voice changed, lost its evenness for the first time since she'd known him. Darcy's mother was not in an accident. Imogen turned to look at him. She was run off a road in Nova Scotia by someone connected to a financial group that wanted information I held and had declined to provide. He said it flat and clean, the way people speak about things they have processed past the point of emotion, past the point where grief has anywhere left to go. They didn't know about Darcy. I made very certain they didn't know about Darcy, and then I spent 6 months making certain they never would. That meant erasing the trail. That meant becoming someone who fixed drywall in Scarborough and appeared in no database of consequence. He looked at the city. Your grandfather knew. He reached out through a channel I trusted. He told me you needed protection from Strauss and that I needed a cover that no corporate intelligence firm would look behind twice. He was quiet for a moment. Who investigates the unremarkable husband of Bay Street's most scrutinized CEO? Imogen stood very still. He forced the marriage, she said finally. He made it available, Lennox said. I said yes. She looked at him. Why? He was quiet for a beat, longer than she expected. Because your grandfather told me what you had given up to keep that firm alive. Every year of your 30s, every relationship, every personal thing most people protect before they protect anything else. He paused. I looked at your record, and I saw someone who had made every sacrifice for something she'd built with her own hands. And I thought. He stopped, started again. I thought you deserved someone in your corner who wasn't there for anything you had. The city hummed below them. Somewhere inside, Darcy made a small sound in her sleep. 2 days later, Imogen walked into the Ward Capital boardroom at 8 in the morning with a manila folder and the particular expression that every person in that room had spent years learning to take seriously. What they had not seen before was the man who walked in beside her, not the quiet figure they had glimpsed at the annual dinner. This was Lennox Parrish without the cover story, in a suit that fit precisely as it was made to, with the calm, unsparing focus of someone who had spent a decade moving capital across 3 continents without anyone knowing his name. Percival Strauss was in the room. He had come expecting to press his proxy advantage. He went pale the moment Lennox sat down. As of this morning, Imogen said, the beneficial ownership of Strauss Capital's institutional proxy positions has been acquired by a third party. Those proxies are no longer aligned with Strauss's voting bloc. She set the folder on the table. The OSC has also received a formal submission regarding structured positions from the 3rd and 4th quarters of last year. Strauss opened his mouth. Don't, Lennox said quietly. Just that one word in a room where it was enough. Strauss closed his mouth. An hour later, Percival Strauss walked out of the Ward Capital boardroom with nothing but his jacket and a legal team he was already dialing on his way to the elevator. He did not look back. When the room emptied, Imogen sat at the head of the table for a moment in the particular silence that follows the end of a long and exhausting fight. The kind of silence that is not empty but full of everything that will now, finally, be different. Lennox was standing at the window, looking at the lake. The group that came after Darcy's mother, Imogen said, is it resolved? 6 weeks ago, he said, completely. So you don't need the cover anymore. No. She looked down at the table. The prenuptial agreement was there. He had brought it without being asked. It sat between them, its edges crisp and formal and entirely absurd given everything that had happened since the registry office on Yonge Street. "Then your contract is fulfilled," she said. "You and Darcy can go back to your real lives." A strange, unwelcome tightness moved through her chest as she said it. She had grown accustomed to the sound of a child's feet on the marble in the early morning, to finding a weather drawing on the kitchen counter before she'd had her first espresso, to the particular quality of stillness that filled the condo when Lennox was there. Not the silence of an empty room, but the silence of a room that was occupied by someone who didn't need to fill it with noise. She realized, with a clarity that arrived all at once, that she did not want either of them to go. Lennox crossed the room. He picked up the prenuptial agreement. He tore it in two, cleanly, and set it on the table. "I made Darcy's lunch this morning," he said. "I drew a son wearing sunglasses because the forecast was clear. And I was standing at your kitchen counter at 6:45, thinking that I'd gotten very used to the sound of your coffee machine and your heels on the floor above, and that I didn't particularly want to stop hearing either." He looked at her steadily. "The cover was the reason I came. You're the reason I stayed." Imogen Ward had not allowed herself to cry in a boardroom since she was 24 years old. The day her grandfather told her, the morning of her appointment as CEO, that her mother would have been proud. She did not cry now, but it was the nearest thing to it she had felt in a very long time. She reached out and took his hand, the calloused, capable hand of a man who had been quietly fixing everything around her, without her knowing it, for 6 weeks, and held it. "I want to renegotiate the terms," she said. The corner of his mouth moved for the first time into something unguarded. "What terms?" "All of them." 6 months later, on a Saturday morning in September, the three of them walked into a farmer's market in the distillery district. The maples along the street had turned, and the air smelled of cold coming and of something baked. Lennox had a canvas tote over one shoulder. Darcy had her sketchbook and a tin of colored pencils, and she was documenting everything with solemn artistic purpose. The color of heirloom tomatoes, the shapes of late-season squash, the particular gold of honey held up against the morning light. A reporter who covered Bay Street for a national paper spotted Imogen at a honey stall and approached, notepad out, asking how she had managed to outmaneuver Percival Strauss so thoroughly. What was the strategy? Who had advised her? The financial world was still trying to work out how it had happened. Imogen glanced across the market to where Lennox was crouching down beside Darcy, listening with complete seriousness as she explained why the purple carrots were more interesting than the orange ones, and why the vendor should really consider reorganizing the display. "I had someone in my corner," Imogen said simply. The reporter waited for more. Imogen smiled, the particular smile of a woman who has built an empire and has finally, unexpectedly, built something she values more, and went back to her family.